here, Sharon, and we usually take up all 4 seats.
Between the two of you, huh?
That's right.
Well, you care for that.
That's right.
Well,
It has that place, isn't it?
Right.
Which one of these buttons you think you bring that up over there?
Well, I'm bringing them up for you.
Well, yeah, a bunch of little, whatever they call these things.
Okay.
Little squares
Do what?
on here.
Now we're recording now.
Well, yeah, but I can't change that, I can't get it.
Uh-oh.
All right. I got everything down here. All right, we're in Genesis, the 39th chapter, beginning there tonight.
That might be better.
And as you can see up there, the heading is From Potiphar's House to Prison. I mentioned last week that Joseph was in Potiphar's house for 13 years. After doing a little more researching, 2 of those years was counted as the prison. So he total of 13 years, but 2 years of it was while he was in prison. And the thing about this chapter that we'll look at is it serves 2 purposes for Joseph while it documents his rise to power. The first thing is in Potiphar's household, he becomes familiar with Egyptian life in general and with the elements of a successful business administration. And then 2, do what? That's all right. I got it working here.
But I can't change nothing.
Okay. So it is recording here, and the sound's on, so we're good there. So the second thing is in the humiliation of being in prison, Joseph is seasoned so that he is later able to endure being placed in an exalted position without danger of falling into conceit. And so these are the things we're going to see here in chapter 39. I don't know of anyone who is sick. We do have some elderly folks, though, that's not able to get out in the evenings. But let's go to our Heavenly Father. Come on in, Cal. We're beginning chapter 39 tonight, Cal. So let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer. Our most loving Heavenly Father, we thank Thee so much for this day and for the many blessings You've given us. And we thank Thee, Father, for the privilege we have of being able to assemble together to study Thy Word without fear of persecution. We thank Thee for the privilege of being able to be an encouragement to each other. And we thank Thee, Father, for this congregation. Looking forward to 2018 and the work that we can do for You in Your vineyard. For 2018, and we ask that You would be with each one of us, that we would recognize the talents and the abilities that You've given us, and that we would use those talents and ability to the full extent possible for the spiritual growth of this congregation, and with that spiritual growth would be numerical growth. We ask, Father, that You be with our members who have physical ailments, those who, due to age and poor health, are not able to get out. We ask that You would be with them, and we ask that You would use us as instruments to reach out and help in any way that we can. These things we ask in Jesus Christ's holy name. Amen. Hello, Jensen.
Hello.
You look like you're lost.
So that's your place.
Yes, I am lost.
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to squeeze in here.
Okay. Let's begin with verses 1 and 2 of Genesis chapter 39. But let me mention here, Victor Eskew, he uses several headings or topics for each chapter, and I chose this one from Potiphar's house to prison, but he also used a title, How to Resist Temptation. Certainly we'll see that, Joseph in Potiphar's house, and a godly man falsely accused. Also, the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord blesses the loyal. He chose Genesis 39, verse 20 as the key verse, which says, And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. Because this verse represents Joseph's transition from Potiphar's house to prison. And as we read this verse, we ask, why was Joseph cast into prison? And a study of the previous verses reveals the answer.
This is place.
Well, turn it off,
Well, I
John.
don't know, I've been trying to turn the blooming thing off, but it won't turn off. There it went.
Just thought we.
So actually your phone's with music.
Someone thought she'd be back.
People on the internet's gonna start thinking that I'm teaching a class with music.
Okay.
Well, you was for a second.
Yes, Cal.
I might suggest an alternate title for this chapter.
Okay?
Know when to run.
Know what?
Know when to run.
Okay, yeah,
You
that's a
don't know
good
when to hold
title.
them, know when to hold them,
Yeah.
know when to walk away, but know when to run.
Yeah, knowing when to run. That's a very good title. So, and we'll see that.
When he ran, he wouldn't have had the problems.
All right, so in your handout, if you're using your handout, it's page 99. And we'll begin in capital letter A. God is always with his faithful. Verses 1 and 2, was the sale of Joseph to Potiphar mere coincidence, or was it the providence of God, is the question I ask here.
Yes.
And so let's begin reading verses 1 and 2. And Jensen, why don't we begin with you tonight?
39, 1 and 2.
Yes, please.
Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian.
Okay, so the officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard was one that was very close with the Pharaoh. And Joseph's sufferings were not unknown to God. That is, it's told at the outset that it makes it evident that the success Joseph experiences is not due to his own work. It says he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian, as opposed to being a field hand. Semitic slaves in Egypt, by their ability, often received better positions than the less intelligent Egyptian slaves. They were employed by about the house as domestics, and they could rise to positions of trust under their masters. And this is exactly what we're going to be seeing with Joseph, because of his work ethics, his faithfulness to God and everything, he did rise in his position here in this house. So we look at Genesis 39 verses 3 and 4. Cal, you want to read that for me, please?
Now his master saw that the Lord was with him, and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and became his personal servant. And he made him overseer over his house, and all that he owned he put him in charge.
Okay. This is a good example to us here, because when you work for a person, do the best job you can. And if you do the best job you can, you're recognized for that work. Sometimes we feel like we might not be recognized the way that we feel we should be recognized, but you generally are recognized for the work that you do. In fact, Martin Luther King always made a statement that if you're going to be the street sweeper, be the best street sweeper that you can be. And your employers appreciate that. Well, Joseph's success was observed by Potiphar. And even Potiphar could tell that his success was traceable to more than Joseph's ability. Potiphar saw Joseph's ability and that the hand of the Lord was with him in all that he did. So he put Joseph in charge of everything he had. And he had authority over the household and personally attended to Potiphar's needs. And this was because of his work ethics. This was because of his dedication and faith to God. Any comments through verse 4? I look at verses 5 through 7. Yes.
What God did Potiphar worship?
I don't know which one. In Egypt, there were a number of gods. I'm preparing the lesson on Exodus right now. And it's interesting that when you look at the 10 plagues that God inflicted upon the Egyptians, those plagues were tied into some of the gods that they worshipped. And that's what made those plagues more destructive and more impactful on the Egyptians. They worshipped something like, if I remember right, there's something like about 36 different gods that the Egyptians
400
had.
years before that.
Well, yeah, it was. But
Potiphar recognized that the Lord was with Joseph.
mm-hmm.
and that he was doing things for Joseph. So he did things.
Oh, yeah.
All them guys they worship don't do nothing.
But you go back to Abraham and all of them. The Gentiles, the Egyptians, those opposing nations recognized the power of God. They didn't recognize, or they didn't worship God, and they didn't accept God, but they recognized the power of God in these people that were faithful to God.
So it don't make sense. Well, their God don't do nothing. So I
No,
worship him
That was their
instead of the God that
choice.
does something.
yeah, that's true.
Well, people didn't say people were smart. Well, basically, humanity is pretty dumb overall.
Obviously.
But in that time of God's, when God was physically impacting and moving events, they knew what was normal and what wasn't normal. And when your sheep are all having twins and they're perfect, and the other guy's having sheep and they look bad, somebody's doing something right.
Yeah. And you look at the book of Exodus and everything, when you'll see the phrase many times, God hardened his heart. If you look at the original text and everything, in most cases, God allowed his heart to be hardened because of the fact that he refused to recognize the power of God. He continued to rely upon his own little gods and his own magicians, if you will, of which they were able to duplicate the first two plagues, but they weren't able to duplicate any others. And yet he continued to refuse the power of God, or continued to refuse to acknowledge the power of God.
He was really stubborn. He was really stubborn.
He was a very stubborn man, yes.
Stubborn and arrogant.
Yes.
Well,
Yes,
basically, he was the ruler of much of the known world.
Yes. Yes. All right, look at verses 5 through 7. Billy, you want to read that, please?
So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, that the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. And the blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and in the field. Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, Lie with me.
All right. In your handout, if you're using it, it's on page 100, and it's capped letter E, F, G, and H. I've basically consolidated those into what I felt was most important. And as I have up there, even the most blessed and prosperous of God's people do not escape temptation. And so, like Cal says, good heading for this chapter is know when to run. Cal?
Well, I'd like to talk about Potiphar just for a minute.
Okay?
Very successful, powerful in his own right, close to Pharaoh, trusted by Pharaoh.
Yes.
Very successful, very intelligent, sees the favor which God is putting upon Joseph, and he's smart enough to go ahead and take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
He's probably older than his wife. I would think if he's the captain of the guard, he's probably in his late 30s, early 40s. He's a powerful warrior, no doubt. But his wife is probably much younger than him. So that puts her much closer to the age of Joseph. I think that's probably what's going on here.
Okay?
And
Very
so
well could be.
Potiphar is a smart cookie, and we're going to see later on how smart he is.
Yes. So as we're seeing here in verses 5 through 7, then God continues to bless Joseph, and the blessing extends outward then to Potiphar, who had treated Joseph well. And because of that, Potiphar put his full trust in Joseph. And this would suggest that Potiphar's a smart man. He sees what he has here in Joseph's ability. So nothing was withheld from his trust to the extent that he had no concern about anything at all except for the food that he ate himself.
Don't call me late to dinner.
Yeah. Don't call me late for dinner. So, which most likely was because of ritual separation at meal times. I put down Genesis 43, verse 32. Turn over there, if you will. Genesis 43 and verse 32. And Donna, if you want to read that for us.
So they served him by himself and them by themselves. And the Egyptians who ate with him by themselves, because the Egyptians could not eat bread with the Hebrews, so that is loathsome to the Egyptians.
Okay. And so indeed, this was the only thing that Potiphar was concerned about, was the food that he ate. And everything else he trusted Joseph with. But there's this little caveat here in that last verse there that Billy read, where it says, "Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance." This would suggest that for people like me that have a pot belly and everything, and we see these people on television, these men that pull off their shirt and they have a six-pack, and you know that they work out and everything, it makes you a little bit envious. Well, I suspect Potiphar might have been just a little bit like that, because Potiphar was a good hard worker, so he probably was very attractive. And apparently all that he had includes his wife. This is talking about Potiphar, but in this case, Joseph had the authority to maybe take care of his Potiphar's wife, maybe provide some of the administration for her and things like this. And obviously she had an opportunity to be around him enough to know what he looked like and get to know him a little bit. So this note prepares us for what comes next in the narrative. A young unmarried man who is left alone with a wife who has been virtually abandoned by her husband spells potential trouble. John?
I was just going to say, according to that 43:32, Joseph had to eat by himself all the time he was in Egypt.
Yeah.
Maybe other servants might eat with him.
He had servants. But
Well, the servants of the Egyptians.
yeah.
Well,
But I
all
used
of them.
that
Servants
verse
had
to-
lots of slaves.
I use that verse just to expound on the fact that the main concern that Potiphar had was just his food, you know.
So what I'm saying is, though, Joseph would, then he'd have to eat by himself all the time. He couldn't have nobody, like friends or anybody.
Well, he was in an elevated position where he probably didn't have a lot of friends. Be my guess.
Go on, sit in the corner and eat your dinner.
Yeah. So Potiphar's wife now notices Joseph. Due to the prominent position that Joseph has and carrying the authority that Joseph had with him, she boldly approaches him with her desire. Yes, Jensen.
Well, in a sermon I heard on this last, Joseph was called a hunk.
He was
An
called
absolute
a hunk.
hunk. Yes, that's the reason, bad scenario.
Well, that very well could have been. I mean, he was handsome and in form and appearance. So Egyptian women were noted for their lasciviousness and unfaithful ways, is the suggestion that one commentary had. And this may very well be the case with Potiphar's wife here. She'd been left alone, and obviously Joseph was very handsome, very attractive, very well built, and so she was attracted to him. Yes, Cap?
Well, I think that's probably true in almost every society of the so-called elite. She would be moving in the areas of the elite.
Yeah.
And so, and even into modern society, we see this, okay? There's a lot of things go on in politics and everything else there that are permitted and people turn a blind eye to. I don't think that with the common people it was that way, but I suspect it probably was that way in the so-called elite in Egypt.
Yeah, very well could have been. All right, let's look at verses 8 through 10 then. Donna, why don't you read that for us too, since you only had one short verse.
But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" And she spoke to Joseph day after day. He did not listen to her to lie beside her or be with her.
All right. Now in your handout, this is capital letter J and capital letter K and L on page 100. Okay? So, as I have up there, there are always a host of reasons why we should not submit to temptation. The greatest reason, obviously, is so we do not sin against God. But Joseph's response is unmistakable here. There is no giving it any thought in this case. And his refusal is a stark contrast from her proposition. She speaks to him 2 words in Hebrew, and he responds with 35 words. Joseph's master had put, yes, John?
You know she spoke in Hebrew.
Because I went back and looked at the various commentaries. And that's what they're suggesting.
They suggested.
And they go back and they look at the Hebrew wording and everything on these words.
Well, the whole text was wrote in Hebrew. How do you know she was speaking Hebrew?
John, I don't know.
You're the one that said she was talking Hebrew.
Yes, because you can look at these words and you can look at what the Hebrew word is for these words. And she spoke 2 Hebrew words.
Did she learn how to speak Hebrew so she could talk to him? Because did they speak Egyptian, didn't they? And then, but he was Hebrew.
But how long was he been in Egypt at this time? He probably could speak Egyptian.
She had to learn some Hebrew language to boss him around.
I don't think he's 17 anymore.
No.
I think it took time to travel down there. He probably went in a lower position, and as he gets older and can take on more authority, he's been given it to him. This is probably 3 or 4, he's probably 21 years old by now.
Probably at least that, because he went in at 17. He was in Potiphar's house for 11 years before he went into prison, so he had to be somewhere around 21, maybe even up to 22, 23 years old.
This is close to the end of his time at Potiphar's.
Probably, yeah, it is.
Probably.
So he's
So if you look
closer
at,
to 27 to 29.
he could be 27 to 28 years of age before he was put into prison, yes. You're right. So, and as Cal mentioned earlier, she was probably in her early 20s herself. Because it was not unknown for Egyptian men to marry much younger women. But we don't know what her age was, but we do know that she was very much attracted to him, and Joseph's master had put unlimited trust in him. Potiphar trusted him with everything he had. So Joseph could not betray Potiphar, and she was the one thing that he could not have. And he didn't want her. Joseph was unsupervised in his youth. He had risen to power quickly. His master had put unlimited trust in him, and she was the only thing that he could not and would not have. Ultimately, though, Joseph refused the temptation because he understood that yielding would be a transgression against God. The shameless hussy, I'll use that word, was not in the least impressed by any of the higher considerations that Joseph had sought to drive into her conscience. Joseph refused to be taken in by her constant pressure, and he ensured his loyalty to his master and to his God by not even being alone with Potiphar's wife. And this goes back to what Cal was saying. Know when to run, know when to stay away from temptation.
Look, notice now. He knew when to fold her. He stayed away from her as much as he could.
Yep. Avoid the temptation, and you won't get bitten.
Now, so he held them, then he folded them, so when she first approached him, he withdrew even farther, and now he's rebuked her, and he's walked away from her one time now.
Yeah.
I don't even think he was tempted. I think he was more probably scared of her coming after him again. I don't even think he had.
Well, you're right. He wasn't tempted because he avoided the temptation. He completely avoided it and, in essence, ran from the temptation.
Boy, I hate to know who say it. Yeah, burn.
All right, Florence, read verses 11 and 12 for us, please.
But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the house were inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside.
All right, this is page 101 of your handout, cap letter M and N. So, the child of God can find himself in bad situations that are beyond his control. And Potiphar's wife now uses a third approach to temptation. previously, she said, sought to tempt him with flattering and startling words. Go back and look at verse 7 again, where it says, "And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph, and she said, Lie with me." So, then, by a long and drawn out process of leaving the temptation open for the taking, we see in verse 10 what Potiphar's wife does. Says, "So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or to be with her." So you can just imagine that every day she's approaching Joseph here now, and she's using flattering words. She's using any kind of sexual suggestion she can use to try to get him to lie with her. So now, at this point, she ambushes him, and all as one are lost in a moment here. For the second time, Joseph is stripped of his garment. The first time, remember, he was stripped when his brothers sold him. Okay? And it is used to purport a lie, if you will. Joseph fled, making certain that he would not be taken into her sin. All right, verses 13 through 15. Kathy, you want to read that for me, please?
And so it was, when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, that she called to the men of her house and spoke to them, saying, See, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us. He came in to me to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And it happened, when he heard that I lifted my voice and cried out, that he left his garment with me and fled and went outside.
So now she's suggesting to hide her deception. Do what? Well, she's lying, yeah, but she's basically accusing him of attempted rape, is what she's doing. And so in your handout on 101, this is capital letter O, if you're using your handout. So when evil people do not get what they want from us, they will often lie about us in order to get revenge against the righteous. And this is what's taking place here. Joseph, yes, yeah.
I think it's kind of funny. She didn't scream. Doesn't appear she screamed. She had to go outside to find somebody to tell. So she told them she screamed.
Yeah.
But you didn't hear me, right?
That's right.
So,
That's right.
I mean, it's just, the story is full of all kinds of holes here.
Oh, yeah, it's full of holes.
The men were all out of the house, so she had to go outside.
Yeah.
Then she
But
But
called
they
and
heard
get
her
them
when
into her
she
house.
called for them.
Yeah.
She didn't say she went out and
I
found
wonder
them.
if
But
She
they didn't
called
hear her
them.
when she
I
screamed.
wonder if she screamed.
Could have called them from in the house.
Well, you probably had to go to the door to holler at them.
So Joseph's coat then is left in the house.
But they heard that holler, but they didn't hear the holler when she was
Scream.
being
No.
attacked.
No.
Paying attention.
So now think about this. His coat was left in the house, so imagine, if you would, that this might arouse as many questions about her as it would about Joseph in this situation, especially if he had been seen fleeing. To point suspicion to him, she quickly calls a household meeting and accuses him of attempting rape or attempted rape, explaining this both by his clothes on the floor and his hasty exit. She uses this phrase, he has brought into us a Hebrew to mock us.
Potiphar's fault.
Do what?
It's Potiphar's fault.
That's right, it's Potiphar's fault now. So at least, and this, if you go back all the way to Genesis, you know, Adam blamed God for giving Eve to him. Eve blamed God for the serpent. Serpent blamed God. You know, it's all somebody else's fault. So what we have here, at least three things are noteworthy in this short sentence. First, she refers to her husband neither by title nor by name as she casts blame on him. Secondly, the verb to mock can mean sexual dalliance or mockery, and probably means both. Finally, that she refers to Joseph by his nationality is an obvious attempt on her part to enlist their sense of Egyptian solidarity. So she's really plotted on this because she couldn't get her way. All right, look at verses 16 through 20. John.
And she laid up his garment by her until her Lord came home. And she spake unto him according to these words, saying, The Hebrew servant which thou hast brought unto us came in unto me to mock me. And it came to pass, as I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled out. It came to pass, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spake unto him, saying, After this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in the prison.
All right. So, at the hands of evil individuals, good circumstances for the righteous can quickly become bad. Potiphar's wife kept the evidence to use against Joseph as soon as Potiphar arrived. And she tells Potiphar the same story that she had told the men of the household. Instead of saying that Joseph left the garment in her hand, like verse 12 says here, that she caught him by his garment, saying, Lie with me, but he left his garment in her hand. So instead of saying that, she says, he left it beside her. Thus, she's insinuating that he had disrobed quite voluntarily as a preliminary to rape. The penalty for Joseph's alleged act was death. Instead, though, Joseph is tossed into the nicest prison around, the king's prison.
I don't know if that's nice.
Well, it probably wasn't very nice. So, why is this that Joseph was put into this particular prison? And it may be a hint. Yes, Donna?
I'm thinking maybe Potiphar might not really believe his wife.
Well, that may be true.
Yeah, It doesn't say anything about that Joseph, said anything about himself, and I didn't do it or anything, but you put him in a place where it wasn't as bad as the really bad prison.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, and he probably knew what his wife was like too, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, he's prospered pretty good because of Joseph.
Yes.
I'm just thinking of the scene. She comes in. She's lying in her bed. Her eyes all red. She's all puckered up. She's got her cosmetics running down her face there.
You must be talking about
And
me.
she's laying a sad story on him, and she's indignant and sad. And, And so, at first blush, he gets angry. Now, is he angry at the Hebrew, or is he angry at his wife? Are you telling me that all those servants around there didn't know what was going on? Are you telling me that he probably didn't have a clue at what really is going on? Well, I think that's why he didn't want to get God mad at him. He knows he's probably not guilty. So he puts him in prison, yes.
Yeah.
Doesn't kill him.
And what you're saying and what Don is saying, because there's two possibilities as to why he wasn't put to death immediately here. One, as was suggested, he may, in fact, doubt his wife's story here. But the other idea is that perhaps he intended to inquire more closely into the matter at leisure to get all the evidence here to find out exactly what happened. It could very well be that Potiphar knew the truth, but was in a bind here as well. He could not disprove his wife's statement, nor could he take the foreign slave's word over his wife's word. So notice that we are not told the object of Potiphar's anger in these verses that was just read here. It never says that he was angry at Joseph. If he was, certainly he would have brought about the appropriate punishment for the attempted rape, and that would be death. Okay?
It just said his anger was aroused. Maybe he didn't have full anger at Joseph.
That's true.
He had to save face, he had to make sure that it looked up good to everybody else too at the same time.
And here's the other idea too. It could be that Potiphar's anger is kindled because he is losing the best thing that has ever happened to him.
And
Yes,
it's quite possible that he's got this wife that Pharaoh has blessed him with this special person to be his wife. So he's caught in this triangle of politics, the politics of home, the politics of the nation, and the politics of industry and everything else around him. And if he kills him, it might please his wife because she's been rejected, but it's going to hurt him, and God's going to be mad at him. If he doesn't do anything, whoever gave him that wife is going to be mad. She's going to be mad. So I'll put him in jail over here. God won't be mad because I didn't kill him. So whoever else is involved says, "Oh, okay, that'll do."
Whole lot of politics.
You think
Because
Joseph,
the politics are working
Oh,
today.
yeah.
Politics have not changed.
Yeah,
We
since
wonder
then.
why Washington's so bad.
played on God's side, to where he didn't want to put him to death? I mean, maybe,
Joseph swaying Potiphar's
yeah,
towards God?
maybe he was, yeah. Do you think Potiphar maybe kind of,
Leaning more towards God than his
Yes.
idols?
says he, yeah,
I guess that's a possibility.
and he didn't want to kill him?
It's obviously Joseph has influence with him.
Joseph had a strong influence with him. For him to have the loyalty that he had towards Joseph, you know that he had a strong influence, and he saw God working through
And he saw
Joseph.
that, so
Yeah.
maybe he was,
So that's a possibility, yeah. All right, look at verses 21 through 23. Sharon, you want to read that?
and the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. The keeper of the prison did not look into anything that was under Joseph's authority, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper.
Okay, so the righteous can overcome deplorable circumstances by means of righteous living. The prison in which Joseph was put was most likely a prison under the oversight of Potiphar. You can go and look at Genesis chapter 40 and look at verse 3 here, for example. It says, "So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, the place where Joseph was confined." Also, 41 verse 10 says, "When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker." So that's a possibility. The keeper of the prison then was a subordinate to Potiphar, if you will. If we are correct in understanding Potiphar to have believed Joseph and this prison to be one under his oversight, we would further suggest that in addition to God's working, or perhaps as a method of God's working, Potiphar had something to do with Joseph's ascent in the prison. Ultimately, he received a position of similar authority as he had in Potiphar's house. And this may go back a little bit to what Sharon was suggesting here, is that Joseph had a positive influence on Potiphar. That statement, whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. This is, in a nutshell, this is the story of Joseph's life in Egypt. God blesses, an Egyptian takes notice. Joseph is promoted. All of this is part of the preparation for him to see God's hand at work in his life, to build him into the kind of leader that would be fitting for the responsibility that he would later be given. Any comments on chapter 39?
Sounds like he's like Jesus was, that he was put there providentially, and maybe Egypt was like the Pharisees in Jesus' time.
Okay.
And maybe the garment that she kept, being an Egyptian, could be the garment that the soldiers kept when they crucified Jesus.
Yes.
And it just all seems to me, if you think about it, and see the details, you can see him again in Jesus' life and his crucifixion, and his prison being probably death.
Yeah.
And then he was raised.
Let me get John first, yeah, and then I'll get you.
I was just wondering, you was gonna look up on, see what them scholars all think about how long Joseph was in prison before the baker got there.
Well, that's what I say, he was in prison about 2 years, from what we get here.
Well, 2 years from the time the baker's dream until the baker got out. Or from the time the baker got out until he talked to Pharaoh. But from the time that he went into prison to when the baker got out, how many years was that?
Well, the 2
6
years.
months, 4 years, 5 years? So is there 5 years, 2 years after the baker got out?
Well, it says he took care of them for some time.
Do what?
It says in verse 3 or 4 there, it says they were confined and Joseph took care of them for some time.
Yeah.
So that's
So what I'm saying is that
relative.
your 20-year timeline you was talking about earlier, there was 2 years for prison. But there's 2 years from the time the baker got out till Joseph got out. There was some kind of time from the time Joseph went in till the baker got out. How long do they think that time was?
Well, that was,
That could have been 3 months to 10 years.
yeah.
So it could have been 50 by the time the brothers got there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it wasn't 50 though. I
There
mean,
was an amount of time there that he was in prison
yeah,
before
but
the baker.
the total time from the time that he went into Egypt to the time that he saw his brothers again was 22 years.
How do we know that?
I'll go back and get all the scriptures for you.
That's what I'm saying, though, that allows for a 2-year period in prison.
Yeah.
But there was 2 years of prison after the baker got out until Joseph got out.
How important is this?
I just want to know about how long, if they know what time it was, how long Joseph was in prison before the baker got out.
Well, the only thing it says time-wise is that he took care of them for some time.
So that's
Now,
all-
some time depends on where you are.
Time limit.
Yeah.
But I would suggest that it wasn't that long. You know, whether it was 6 months or whether it was 2
Yeah.
years. It wasn't much longer than that. But I don't know.
So it could be 6
But
months
you
to
do
2
understand
years.
what I'm asking.
I understand what you're asking, but I don't have an answer for you.
You said you'd go get one.
You said
All I can give you is what the commentaries say.
That's what I'm saying. What did they say?
And your idea is as good as theirs. so-
Yeah.
Their commentary is just as good as mine.
we like your differences.
Okay. Any other comments on chapter 39?
Okay.
Okay, Al, you had a comment.
I think he
Did I
forgot.
lose your train of thought?
Don't be on years.
Well,
Are you on years too?
I was going to comment on what Pat was saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
There are about between 33 and 39, I don't remember the exact comparisons between Joseph and Jesus that are exact, that lay a pattern. So Joseph was a type of Jesus. It's just as Joshua was a type, and there were different types of Jesus, but Joseph is probably the one that's most closely associated with the idea of how he would come. He would be rejected by his brethren. He would be thrown into the pit. He would be tempted. He would do this. And it just goes on and on and on. And if you like, I got the comparisons written out. I can bring them in. You can look at them.
And what you're saying is very true, because when you get to the end of Genesis, the brothers assumed that Joseph was going to take revenge upon them, but what did Joseph do? He forgave
He
them.
forgave?
And he took care of them, just as Jesus
Forget.
did. Well, the clock on the wall says it's actually 14 minutes till, yes.
No bell.
Here in
Is the
this
bell even working?
23,
The bell isn't working.
it says
Yeah, I don't think the bell is
the
working.
keeper of the prison did
Well,
not
then
look
say
at
that's a big
anything
thing.
Joseph. He was already in prison.
Yes.
And it goes down to 40. It's talking about the baker and the butler getting put in prison after Joseph was in prison. What are you talking about?
That's what I'm saying. Joseph went to
Oh,
prison.
oh, gosh. Oh, okay. Forget it. Forget it.
Sometime later,
You
You
got
just
to
got
add
it.
that
I'm
one.
sorry.
How long is some time?
I had to fix.
Sometime.
I
All right.
had to fix 6.
We'll get chapter 40 next week, then. Appreciate your comments and your participation.
I was going to fix you.
Really, Sharon?
Years, like 50 years.
50. When?
April 19th.
April.
50 years with this man. Asking
You
this
haven't
question.
fixed it yet.
Yeah, I tried. He didn't tell me to take it off yet, but
Fix what ain't broke.
So I spent some time with somebody. How long sometimes depends on who you are and where you are.
And if you like
When I
that
spent
person
some
or
time
not.
in jail, how long was it? It seemed forever.
I was gonna say a day was about a year.
But I spent some time with this beautiful woman. How long was it? It wasn't long enough.
Exactly. I spent some time here in the freezing weather versus I spent time at the beach. I can stay longer. Comparison with Joseph and Jesus.
I've got it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna come over Saturday and do that. Then I got to go over and do the beach show.
I said, is this the beach show at the fair?
How are you?
And she said, yeah. And I said,
He didn't say anything about it. We talked to him today, which I did not think about it.